Hello, welcome once again to the Raw Men Podcast, episode 28, I believe this is. And this episode, we finally got Mark back. Haven't seen you in a while. How do you do, sir?
I'm back. Oh, I feel great.
Do you have any announcements for us before we begin?
I do. The episode's sponsored by the Pennsylvania Atheists and Freethinkers Conference, atheistpa.org. Still tickets available. It's the weekend of the 13th. It's in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I will be the MC, and Arn and I and the Raw Men will be doing a live recording on stage at the conference. So come down. A lot of good tickets available. I've been told all the VIP tickets are sold out. That's a good sign. If you've been to conferences before, if all the VIP tickets sell, you know it's going to be a good conference. So check it out, atheistpa.org.
Very good, very good. And we are interviewing tonight Rob Moore and Sean from Atheist Milwaukee. And how you guys doing?
Good, Aaron.
All right, Aaron.
Thanks for having us. We're Mythicist Milwaukee. I
Did
don't mean to
Atheist
correct.
Milwaukee?
Yeah, it's close enough, right?
You're right. My apologies. I can't believe I did that. I don't know what was wrong with me. All right, guys. So I understand you have a conference of your own coming up. Is that right?
Yes, we do. We do.
In
We,
September.
Yep, we have a conference coming up in Milwaukee. This is the second ever conference in Milwaukee, secular conference, and we hosted the first one back in April. And what's really exciting about this conference is we have Mandisa Thomas, David Fitzgerald, and Arthur George, but we have special appearance by Caleb Priest from the Wu-Tang Clan. So we actually have a hip-hop artist coming to speak at a secular conference, which, you know, based on my research, I haven't seen this happen before, so we're really excited to have that.
Oh, very good. I tried my best to get Motorhead to Reason Rally. Because I was going for the same thing. I mean, how cool would that be? But, oh well. All right, so on the idea of Mythicist Milwaukee, you know, I'm really keen on that whole idea, but how did you guys attach yourselves to it? Mythicist.
Well, it's kind of funny, and you're going to get a lot of people downvoting how we came across this, but we actually we found this information through part 1 of Zeitgeist. Now, I know that's a dirty word in a lot of circles, but for us, what it did is it introduced us to this idea of comparative religion and the problems with the historical Jesus, and how earlier pagan religions have influenced, you know, the traditions and the religions that kind of take precedent today. So we stumbled upon that video, and we were like addicts. We watched it for like 100 times straight. You know, we were just kind of really hooked on it, and we just, you know, we were just so fascinated by it. Now I understand that there's scholarship issues in the documentary, but what that did is it challenged us to kind of dig deeper and to look and see, you know, where the problems are, what the good information was that was in it, and it just, you know, it sparked this interest for us that, you know, we never had before. We weren't involved in secularism or atheism or anything, but once we saw that, we wanted to dig a little bit more. So actually, I traveled to Egypt in 2013. I hired some tour guides, and they took us around. We went to the pyramids and things like that, and the tour guides were great. They would say, they would make claims like, well, this is where the Trinity comes from, or this is where this comes from. So it was a really great experience. So that's kind of like what opened it up for us. We've been traveling since. We've been to Greece. We've been to Nicaragua. Just kind of on this quest to continue learning. And then we actually, in the beginning, D.M. Murdoch was a really big person that helped us out. She motivated us, and she said, you know, she really believed in what we were doing. And I just wanted to thank you, Arn, because I know in the scholarly world, she kind of gets a bad rap. And in some cases, it's really unfair because her scholarship is very good. And when you had her on this last year, I believe, when she released Did Moses Exist? That was really great. You know, so since then we've worked with Dr. Richard Carrier. We've had David Fitzgerald on the podcast. So we're really about kind of getting the message of mythicism out there, because we feel that for some people kind of is the end-all be-all. Once people start to see, you know, where these religions came from and like how earlier religions are the foundation, that makes a little bit more sense to them.
Hey, you guys haven't interviewed Bob Price yet, right?
Oh, we have. We actually had him on. Yeah, we're big fans of Dr. Robert Price. He actually has a Kickstarter out there right now for those that want to support it. People are trying to get him to debate Bart Ehrman right now, which would be fantastic.
Oh, that would be good, wouldn't it?
Yeah, for a mere $10,000, there's a group has a Kickstarter out there, so look for that. That would be fantastic.
After seeing how he did with with William Lane Craig, yeah, it would be so much fun to watch him debate Bart Ehrman. And the funny thing is, I like Ehrman too. I mean, I do. I mean, I went to an excellent class on history of world religions. It was taught by a Methodist minister with a PhD in comparative religions. I've personally been to a number of different like temples in Asia and so forth. And the class was based on the work of Bart Ehrman. Now, this is coming from a Methodist, someone who's a confessed Christian, but he certainly isn't like what you would expect a Christian to be, certainly in Texas. He was the most like-minded person to myself in the entire classroom, and he admitted that all of these different religions actually stem from other religions, and certainly Christianity stems from a whole slew of them. So I mean, the differences that I would have with Ehrman really is on that one feature: is did Jesus exist?
Right.
That's it. A lot of people will complain about D.M. Murdoch, by the way, because he was involved in that movie, and of course, when I had her on, we had talked about that. And she said that the one issue that I think everybody brings up, and certainly that irked me the most, was the one where they were talking about the sun, S-O-N, and comparing that to sun, S-U-N, as if those people were speaking English, right? And she said that she was completely unaware that they made that connection when they were forcing her for this international comparative religion, because all she was involved with, she was not involved with the whole thing about the 9/11 conspiracy crap and the New World Order stuff. That movie that you're talking about was actually in 3 sections. And what you and I were talking about momentarily, obviously we were only talking about the first part of it, the part that concerns religion, because we know there's some validity there. To a large degree, we dismiss or disregard or just not discuss the other 2 parts at that point.
Right.
Aaron, your audio is getting kind of rough. Can you hear that?
Was my audio getting rough?
Yeah, you sound like you got something in the back, a fan.
Like
your voice kind of got
or something, yeah.
Oh well, I do. I'll kill the fan.
kill the fan.
Also have this.
But I understand exactly what you're saying, Aaron. The first part of Zeitgeist was put together by Peter Joseph, who actually did the documentary, and he lumped in the 9/11 conspiracy, and then he took his agenda a little bit further with the economics and the more resource-based economy that he's kind of pushing. And it's really unfair, because you're absolutely right. He took several different scholars' information and threw it into one, and she ended up getting the black eye because a lot of it was her scholarship. So yeah, it really is an unfortunate situation. But the film itself, what it does for laymen, and that's what we are. We're laymen. We don't have hours and hours to study biblical texts and to get back to the pagan scrolls and to look at the Babylonian religions. I mean, I enjoy some of that now, but yeah.
That D.M. Murdoch did all of this in the original languages.
Correct.
So one of the important things to bring up was that like Bob Price was at one point one of D.M. Murdoch's critics. And I bring this up because I know that there's going to be people that will be wanting to say this about this book. But Bob Price has changed his mind largely about her. And the last time that he was on my show, he was talking about how he and D.M. Murdoch are among the only people left, or the only people out there who are trying to get this information about mythicism out there, so that people know. Like the Board of Education, we were talking about the fact that the Board of Education has now approved, in Texas, approved textbooks describe Moses as a historic character. born in the 1200s.
That's so scary.
Yeah, well, of course, when you talk to people who actually know something about the history and have done some study on the subject, I mean, the idea of Moses is no more realistic than Robin Hood or King Arthur. People need to understand this. This was not a person who actually lived. But the same people were promoting a textbook that was identifying the inhabitants of Africa as if they were the sons of Ham, son of Noah. And so I'm having to talk to the Board of Education again, saying that Noah didn't exist. So Ham didn't exist. So there's no such thing as Hamitic people. It's strange when you're talking to a Board of Education and you're having to explain these sorts of things.
The original listeners knew that it wasn't real. The original listeners knew it was a metaphor. They understood the power of the myth. That's what scares me. Here we are 4,000 years later, and people are taking it literal.
What gets me when you talk about what is literal, what is figurative, when you're talking about like the term "eat of the fruit of the tree of," right? In the Bible, it uses this analogy several times. And every time it does, the fruit of the tree of, or the fruit of, always refers to the consequence of this action, right? This is what it means in every other case when it's used, except in Genesis, where suddenly it's literal. Where suddenly we're talking about an actual fruit that you can make cobbler out of, or it comes from a tree you can cut down and build a canoe. No, this is not the way it happened. Snakes don't talk. And it's alarming to me when people try to argue against evolution, thinking that there's some protein in an ATP motor that they don't have an explanation for. Therefore, magic. Therefore, talking snakes and cursed fruit.
Right. Exactly. Well, and the thing is, you are very studied on the subject, and that's one of the issues. It's most people, they don't want to take the time, and that's, when we go back to the Zeitgeist film, that's what it did. It really gave you this information, although some of it was incorrect, which we understand. It gave you this information that was just quick. People can listen to it and understand it and get interested in it. And actually, we are working with a Milwaukee filmmaker to kind of redo it. And we don't have a title yet, but inside our little group, we're calling it Rightgeist. We want to get where Zeitgeist got it wrong. So we want to work with Richard Carrier and David Fitzgerald and Kenneth Humphreys and Robert Price, and so that's one. Yeah, that's one of the things. It's weird for us to be on this side. We're normally the ones asking questions, but that's the question I always ask the mythicist minds is, where can we have a project where you guys can meet in common ground? Because all too many times we're talking about where they disagree. We want to bring something together to show where we do agree, so we can start getting the consensus out there. We can start getting people to understand that this information is accurate and this information is very important. One of the things that we've been focused on lately is the lost goddess Asherah in the Old Testament. You'll hear people in the Old Testament, they'll say this is myth, this is that. You have to, this is metaphor, but that's true. But one of the big things in the Old Testament is that Yahweh actually had a wife, a consort, and she was essentially written out of history. I mean, this is like a really big subject, because now you can see like the goddess narrative was actually represented, but it was just kind of pushed away and erased. So this is the type of stuff we think is really important. If people start to understand what these myths actually meant and where they came from, we think people can make better decisions when they're trying to say who was historical and who wasn't.
Well, the injustice that's been done to women, with that as an excuse, echoes to this day. I mean, the beginnings of patriarchal society and putting women down are right there for everyone to see. What's your take, Aaron, on the lack of consensus among mythicists? Do you think there'll ever be any kind of a real consensus? Because it occurs to me that everybody just sort of extrapolates their own conclusions from whatever research and whatever facts or texts are there to be found. Do you think they'll ever agree?
I don't actually see where there's any disagreement right now. I mean, I've interviewed, like you all have, I've interviewed Bob Bryce and Dia Murdoch and David Fitzgerald and Richard Carrier and Frank Zindler, for example. I mean, and all of these people seem to agree. You know, they have different reasons or different favorite arguments that they'll bring up when it's regarding Jesus. Okay, different reasons that have compelled other peoples to question the idea of Jesus. But at least when we're talking about Moses, everybody's in absolute agreement on that one.
Right.
That there was no damn Moses. That there was
All right.
there was no 2 million Hebrew slaves living in Ramses. None of that happened.
No Exodus.
Yeah, and here's a fun fact for you. I brought this up in a recent presentation. I think you might have seen it. But if there were these 2 million slaves, if you take away everybody else that was supposed to be traveling with them, and just think about the 600,000 Hebrew men on foot that the Bible talks about in Exodus, if they started their march from Canaan, from Ramses, and they started out single file with each man walking 1 meter ahead of the other, I mean, this is about what you would, standing single file in a line, each man would occupy about 1 meter of space. So if they start out 600,000 men on foot walking single file, following the coastline to Canaan, the first ones would get there before the last ones left.
Right, right.
Because it's only like 450 kilometers, right?
Right.
Or 280 miles, something like that. And so we're talking about a period in history when Egypt, the entire country of Egypt, had only 3.5 million people in it. So you say that in one town, just one town by itself, you got 2 million people? How come they didn't take over?
Right. Right. Exactly.
But then look also at the fact that at the same time you also have Ezekiel, right, who says that in the time of Nebuchadnezzar that there was going to be this I can't remember what it was, this curse or whatever, this situation in which Egypt was going to be completely barren, where there's no man or beast in the entirety of the kingdom for 40 years. There would be no one would set foot there, neither man nor animal. When the hell did that happen? We know that it didn't happen. We know that these prophecies failed, but we're talking about people who are determined to believe and determined not to understand if it threatens that belief.
Right, right. And that's, one of the things with our organization, we kind of understand that when dealing with somebody that is that strong to their faith, it's hard to have that conversation. We're focusing more on the secular minds, those that are on the fence, like we never really bought any of it. But once we started seeing this information, it just kind of opened up our eyes, and we got really interested in it. And one of the things we like to focus on, and I know some mythicist scholars don't like this too much because it can get dangerous, but the parallels that exist. Some scholars will call it parallel mania. But there are actual parallels that do exist in religions to this today that come from the pagan religions. When you see the dying and rising gods, the lawgiver motif, as you were pointing out with Moses, all of these different things, the turning water into wine and all that stuff. When you can showcase that this stuff is not unique to Christianity or Judaism or Islam, people start to kind of open up. I mean, just the fact that Jesus is in Islam. One of the things is people will argue that Jesus exists, but my comment to that is, well, if Jesus existed, which one are we talking about? Are we talking about the ones in the Gospels? Are we talking about the ones in the Nag Hammadi Gospels? Are we talking about in Islam or Mormonism? I mean, even Scientology has Jesus. They say that aliens implanted that into our mind to have the image of Jesus. So it's like he really is that figurehead that religions have used to kind of garner support. He's the hero. He's the one that everyone wants to be like. But a lot of people don't understand. This stuff is not unique. I mean, this stuff comes from much earlier religions that we deem as myth now. So part of our stance is let's get these Abrahamic faiths to belong where they should be in mythology. I mean, this is where this stuff belongs. I think smart, logical people, can see that.
Well, you mentioned how other religions had appropriated Jesus. Islam did also.
Yep.
There's old documents that talk about how Jesus comes out every now and again to perform miracles for all these village people. This is after he's supposedly been crucified and all of this. He's still creeping around, living in a house somewhere, according to these Islamic documents. And he performs these miracles, and people want to come to him and worship him, and he says, no, there's going to be another that will come after me, and you should worship him, or that you should not worship him, but he is the true prophet, the final prophet, and he is Muhammad. And so Jesus in these stories is telling people that there's another one who is better than he.
Mm-hmm.
You know, of course he would say that in the Islamic doctrine, right?
Right.
Of course he doesn't
He's
say that in
Jesus the Baptist.
And when you guys are talking about these comparative things, you know, when I interviewed Dia Murdoch, it was after I read her book, and I was impressed with all of the stuff that she had managed to dig up, and I was really surprised that I happened to know one of these ancient legends that she did not.
Yeah.
And this is a funny one. I like this one. So if you want to look up the Westcar Papyrus, there's a story there about the Pharaoh Snefru. Now there's variable spellings on that. The Pharaoh Snefru had these. Like most heads of state, he has an elaborate vacation, you know, to get the stresses of rulers off of his mind. So he would go into this barge, he would sail across this lake, and he had all these women manning the oars. So he would pick out all these beautiful women, strip them topless, and watch them row his boat, literally. That's his story. So he has this magician named Jajamank, and one of these girls drops a turquoise bauble of some kind of a necklace or something. She drops it over the side, and she's terribly upset that she's lost this piece of jewelry. So Snefru summons his mage, Jajamank, and Jajamank casts a spell on the lake so that he can lift the lake up, fold it over itself. He folds the water over itself like looking under a blanket, and retrieves the turquoise bauble for the girl manning the oar, so that the pharaoh can look good to this stripper girl. And then the mage folds the water back on itself. Now this story was told in Egypt of the pharaoh 1,000 years before the estimated time of Noah. So, I'm sorry, did I say Noah? I'm sorry, before the estimated time of Moses. Yes, exactly. So Moses was supposed to be, by most estimates, be about 1,200. What was it? I can't really. 1200 BC, and Jajamank was roughly 2200 BC. So when you get to the story of Moses parting the Red Sea, in order to save the lives of 2 million people as they're trying to escape from this legion, and all he does is part the sea so they can traipse across the mud, compared to this other guy who folds the water over itself just to retrieve a trinket for a topless stripper. I don't know. I don't see where the story's all that significant.
Well, and since we're on myths, I'll give you one maybe you haven't heard of. There's an Egyptian myth that has the Nile turning into blood around 3000 BCE, somewhere around there. But
that old.
So it's somewhere around there. Don't quote me on that, but it's definitely before the Old Testament. But the sun god Ra actually feared that the people of Egypt were going to overthrow him. The gods fearing the people. So he sends the goddess Hathor out, who was to punish the people. But she killed so many people that their blood flowed into the Nile and actually caused a flood. So there is the Nile is now blood and it's flooding. So I mean that's one of the ones where it's like, well, we see the Nile turning into blood again, but it's not, an Israel religion, it's an Egyptian religion. So I mean it's just really interesting.
And you don't have any original elements in modern Western monotheism at all. Everything appears to be borrowed.
Right.
The idea, and I was talking about this with a pagan priest once upon a time, when he was telling me that his patron deity was Dionysus. And we had this discussion about Dionysus. Now, in the story about Dionysus, and this is the books that we know of that tell about Dionysus are no less than 500 years before the time supposed of Jesus, right? So there's no doubting this. Okay, so Dionysus doesn't just do the Penn and Teller trick where he pours water into a jug and then turns the jug upside down and pour wine out. This is what Penn and Teller do. But this is what Jesus does. But this is not what Dionysus does. Dionysus causes the springs of the earth to bubble up wine. That's a much better trick.
Right.
So not only did Dionysus turn water into wine, but he did it in a much more spectacular way, and in a way that Penn and Teller couldn't have duplicated.
And
He
there's
keeps on giving.
And there's another one on Dionysus, Aaron, if you want one for your arsenal there. Actually, Plutarch writes this in the 1st century, but when Dionysus is born, this is according to Plutarch, when Dionysus is born, the body of water he actually is born in, he turns the whole body of water into wine because he's born, and that turns all of it into wine. So there's another one for you there.
Oh, that's pretty good. So I told this pagan priest, I said, my thought is that, since Dionysus came before Jesus, why would God make his son a sequel to what is perceived to be a human idea? So either Dionysus really could turn water into wine just like Jesus did, or Jesus couldn't really do it either. And
Right.
The logical conclusion was the latter.
Right.
Which was a big step in my walking away from Christianity, by the way.
Well, and it gets even worse. I mean, it depends on what text you're looking at for Jesus. I mean, in various texts, he's growing to 500 feet tall. In Islam, he's talking as a baby. He's doing all these things. In Islam, actually, he's supposed to come back at the end times and kill the Antichrist, and then live until he's 40 and then die. In Islam, the crucifixion never happened. It was a trick. He was supposed to go on the cross, and something happened, some magic happened where they made someone else who looked like Jesus go on the cross, so some innocent guy died instead of Jesus, and then Jesus escaped, and like you said, he's still alive. So I mean, this it all depends on where you see it. In Mormonism, Jesus had 3 wives. I mean, this what are we talking about here? Now it all depends on what text you're looking at, and that's where the confusion comes in for a lot of people, I think.
The reference to Mormonism, my favorite reference to Jesus in Mormonism is the point where Jesus appears to Joseph Smith and Jesus is standing next to God.
Yes. I have so many favorites from Mormonism, it's funny. So,
Mr. Moore, I haven't heard a lot from you tonight.
Yeah, we got the Mythmaster going. You guys are trading off old stories. I come at it from the activist point of view, and I have to agree with Sean that seeing Zeitgeist turned me on too to mythicism. I've been an atheist since I was an adult, and I got into this to be an activist more on the separation of church and state kind of issues. We have a local creationist camp where the public school sends their kids, and we can get into that a little bit later.
The public school?
Yeah, we talked about it on the podcast a while back. It's the public school sends here in Kenosha, Wisconsin, sends their kids on an overnight science trip to a facility that's a creationist camp where private citizens can send their kids for the summer, and they have year-round events, and it's literally a $22 million camp. It's got a lake and a forest and zip lines and horses, and it's an absolutely huge, wonderful facility for the people who use it. But they have a science center that includes a creation walk where you go through 7 rooms and you see a slideshow and a presentation, and they explain the creation
7
processes
days.
that happen. 7 days, yeah, you go right down the line, and the kids don't actively learn that. They use it as a facility where they teach them natural sciences that everybody can agree on, like a raccoon has a mask, and the leaves turn color in the fall. They don't actively teach them creationism, but my objection is that the school is using its public funds to basically advertise this camp, because no kid doesn't want to get left out, and the kids that don't go have to go to a it's a fifth grade trip, but the kids who stay behind have to go to 4th grade class for those days. They get ostracized, they feel left out. So the whole thing amounts to a giant PR campaign for this camp. So,
and that's the big. No, you're right, and this is the first time I spoke up, because this is something that's close to my heart, and my kids experience it too, and the key to that, and the battles have been fought by FFRF and American Atheists, and even the ACLU all around the country have said, if what you're doing makes anyone sit out and be set to the side based on not wanting to do something, then nobody gets to do it. You know what I mean? And that's the same thing with you, because the person that sits out is automatically an oddball, and that becomes a social injustice for that kid. You know, and that's a pressure that churches and religious groups will use to keep people doing shit.
And I've had too many times I've had people try to justify lies in defense of creationism. I mean, like, for example, I was on a creationist talk show with Scott Sloan, where he told me that there was nothing wrong with lying to people if they don't know you're lying. And then supporters for, and I'm not kidding about this, and the guy used, deceiving his own kids, lying to them about whether he's going to take them to Disneyland. He said he would put them in the car if they were begging him to go to Disneyland. He doesn't want to listen to them. He would put them in the car and drive to some abandoned building and then say, "Whoops, sorry kids, it's closed," and then drive home. And this to him was justified. He said that on national radio. And I was stunned that he would make that admission. And then, Kent Hovind supporters here recently, when I did a video saying that why I wouldn't debate Kent Hovind, I said that I hate liars. And, of course, his supporters come on and say, well, then you hate everybody in the world then. Like, so your justification for this philosophy is to say that everybody does it, so it's okay? I mean, don't you feel offended, violated in some way when you've been deceived?
Clearly.
Right.
Well, so you would expect that if you're going to mislead other people's kids, then there's a moral issue there, right? You're gonna take kids to a creation camp where they have these 7 rooms of creation and these creation tutorials where, well, okay, so they're not actively teaching creation, but it is in a creation camp, and it's not like they're prohibited. It's not like those rooms are roped off, right?
Right. And in this case, the place that Rob is alluding to, it is utilized for secular practices, sciences, things like that. But the sign when you drive into the camp, it says "God loves you." I mean, there's like crosses all over the place, and so even though public school kids are going there for secular activities, it's not being hidden very well. So I agree with Rob, and actually I joined him on a tour. They took us through a tour and told us how great Jesus was. And then they said they were talking about the creation, and I said, well, do you guys ever talk about any of the other creation myths? Do you talk about the Babylonian creation myth, or the Hindu creation myth, or Egyptian? And they were like, no. They had to pause for a second. No, we don't tell people about
only Genesis. He said only Genesis.
Only Genesis.
Yeah, when I was in high school, I asked, why is it that you'll teach us, Greek and Roman mythology when they're practically the same thing?
Thank
and then
you.
You'll teach us Norse mythology, but why will you not teach us Egyptian mythology or Sumerian mythology? And I mentioned a couple of others, and they said, well, because those are controversial.
Yeah.
And I was a high school kid, and I said, how could mythology be controversial?
Right.
And then,
I'm glad you brought this up.
When I was a college student and I had opportunity to actually read Sumerian mythology and Babylonian mythology, I'm like, oh, that's why.
It never dawned on me, but I believe it's an absolute conspiracy to keep people from questioning it. I never thought of it until I saw Zeitgeist and started talking to these mythicist guys, and I'm saying to myself, God, they should teach this stuff in elementary school. We had mythology in 4th grade, like you said, Norse and Greek, the easiest ones to dismiss as mythology, but when you see ones that clearly reflect the Judeo-Christian myth arc, well, we got to keep that out of the kids' ears. So,
see, even when you're just doing the Greco-Roman stuff, when you open up Pandora's box and you have the story of Prometheus bound, what does it take to link these two tales together? I mean, this is Adam and Eve, literally.
Right. Exactly.
Right, and the stories of God's coming down to earth and right, and God's coming down and making love to females.
Yeah, being punished for forbidden knowledge.
Right. Well, even Zeus, the story of Zeus, he is, when he's born, his mother had to save him from being eaten by Kronos. And so when that happens, she feeds him a stone, and it saves Zeus. But when that happens, there's so many parallels to kind of the divine child needing to be protected from infanticide, and it's insane. You start to see all of these things play out, and these motifs just repeating over and over. Yeah, and that's one of our things. We would love to have this in a school where you didn't have to, work on your doctorate in order to start getting introduced to some of this stuff. I mean, this is just not common knowledge, and unfortunately what happens is you have a bunch of adults that aren't educated in this area, and, the cycle just keeps repeating.
A lot of these people will complain that we're just we're just as bad as they are. This is another great defense of wrong, is by saying that we are as bad as they are. That what we espouse is also faith. When it couldn't be
Right.
any more different. I mean, it is absolutely the opposite. It's not that we care that the kids believe what we want them to believe. That's not even the point. We're teaching them how to think. We're giving them the information. We're asking them to show fault in the information if it's at all possible to do that. We offer great rewards for anyone who can do that. The only way to get rich as a scientist is to overturn the status quo. When you can disprove everybody else and there's all this peer review so that you want to make your assertion and nobody can prove it wrong, well, then they got to say, well, maybe he's got something there. And that's the way to get notoriety in science. It works exactly the opposite of faith.
Right. Well, even coming out as secular, that's one of the things, in Milwaukee, as we mentioned before, there really isn't a secular community, and we're trying our best to start creating that with the conferences and the meetups and the YouTube videos and things like that. But coming out as secular or openly atheist, you really are. You could be sacrificing your family, your friends, your job. We had a great story that just happened. A local journalist in a major publication, Milwaukee Magazine, in Milwaukee, came out as openly secular. And he did this after our conference was over. He actually was at the conference. We didn't know he was there. He wrote this great piece. His name is Mario Quadracci. He wrote this great piece about how he's an atheist and how he, the path of becoming an atheist and how hard it's been. But I mean, him being in a position where he's in this mainstream magazine, this is really risky. This is risky not only for him, but for the magazine. The magazine actually had subscribers reaching out to them saying, you don't know your fan base. This is ridiculous. In some cases, threatening to leave the subscription. I mean, this is what you're doing.
Was this Faith No More? Was that the article?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, I had that on my screen all day until I forgot where I even got it from.
Oh yeah, I'm glad you read it.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Yeah, Faith No More. It was really a risky article for Mario as well as the magazine, and thank you for reading it. I tried getting it out to people to share it. This is just something that doesn't happen in Milwaukee. Our conference was already kind of like people are a little worried about that, but then having this magazine come out, so we are starting to see a change, which is good. But just coming out sometimes it's just so scary for people, even though they are open. They're secular in the closet and they support secular values, and they're atheists. They don't buy the mythology. They can't come out.
Well,
Think of how sad that is.
Madeline Murray O'Hare said, I'm sorry, to go ahead.
It's 2015 in Wisconsin, and you think of it as being a liberal state. We got Madison, FFRF. Historically, Madison has been a hotbed of liberalism, even though we got a ridiculous governor there now. But here we are in Milwaukee, is almost as far north as you can get in the country, and we're mired in an absolute quicksand pit of conservative religious values. The fact that Milwaukee Magazine took heat, they got hate mail and emails saying, what are you doing? Listen to your, think about your readership. It's absurd to me. So that's really why I got into it. And the fact is that the folks at Mythicist Milwaukee are the only activists in secularism, in atheism. There's a handful of us. We're growing steadily, but this is the group that's doing something. So we're really here to bring an actual profile to the secular community in Milwaukee, besides exposing mythicism itself.
Well, good luck with that. I understand that your governor is actually running for president, right?
Sadly.
Yeah, he's an imbecile. It really gives me a headache to even think about him being president. I don't know how he could possibly win.
I think
he came out on the fence with evolution. Go, Mark.
I think that in the instance of the magazine taking heat, I think it's an example of the fringes are the loudest in some cases because they didn't have the readers that appreciated it saying anything. The only ones that were saying something were the ones that didn't appreciate it, so that sounded the loudest. I'm not saying that there wasn't a lot of flack because my wife and I were in a newspaper article in our area, and we got some negative feedback. We got a little bit of positive feedback too, but I just think that in a lot of cases, for better or worse, the groups that speak out a lot of times are on the outside, whether that's or at least the fringe of the outside, where they feel the most strong and they feel like they need to say something because their most extreme ideals are being tamped out.
Right.
Yeah,
Well,
that's absolutely true.
So when we were talking about your governor running for president, I mean, I do have to bring up the GOP debate at the last question. I think it was. Does God talk to you? I mean, do we all envision a world where a question like that could be answered the way we would hope that your average man on the street would answer that question? Does God talk? No, I'm not nuts. Or on the issue of do you believe in a God? I mean, the best answer that I think that a politician could possibly give on that, from my perspective, what I would consider a good answer is, I don't believe in that. I don't have time for that kind of thing. I don't have time for that. That would be the good answer.
Yeah.
Well, for all these people, for Ted Cruz, for example, who says that he's following the Bible because he's a fiscal conservative. What?
Right.
When did Jesus say to shit on the poor? When did Jesus say to be as rich as you possibly can and screw everybody else?
He's the classic socialist. Jesus was such a socialist. He's not a communist.
Yeah, it's probably the only thing I like about the guy. He was a faith healer, and that makes him shit in my book. But at least he wasn't. At least he wasn't the money grubbing kind of faith healer that we have right now. Send me your $1,000 vow of faith, and I will sow your seed.
Right. Exactly. And I think another good answer to that question would be, which one? Which God? Does God talk to you? Which one? That's kind of where we're trying to get this thing, so people understand. Yahweh or Jehovah is not the only God. Even within the Old Testament, you see how he is depicted as three beings. Often, you see him as three different beings in the tent with Abraham, and then you see how he directly is connected to Elohim. I mean, in the Canaanite mythology, you start to see, that. So which one are we actually talking about? First of all, if you say yes, you're crazy. But if you say, if you ask the person, what God are you actually asking me about? I think that's powerful as well.
I'd like to ask you about Asherah. What have you uncovered about her?
Yeah, it's a really, really fascinating topic. We've had a couple guests on that talked to it. Actually, Arthur George, who's going to be presenting at the conference, he's going to be bringing her up. But it's a very fascinating piece where you have, when you see how the Canaanite religion, when you have El and Asherah, that was the father of the gods, and his consort, his wife, Asherah, and then they have the sun Baal. When you see how that religion is very popular in that area, and then all of a sudden it starts merging with the clan of Yahweh, and then Yahweh starts kind of taking over early in the earliest texts, and there's archaeological evidence of this information that shows Yahweh is with Asherah. It's a fascinating topic. You start to see how he actually had a wife, he had a consort, and she had temples built to her, and women would worship there, and she was mainly like a fertility goddess. Women, after they gave birth or before they gave birth, they would praise her. It was really just, a very positive experience for them. And you start, even in the Old Testament, as the books are being written, you start to see how they're trying to destroy her. You'll see passages like you have to burn the Asherah. That her symbol was of the tree of life. You start to see in the Old Testament where it's you have to burn the Asherah, you have to destroy the Asherah. So you kind of see how they're like writing her out of history because it became more male centric, very misogynistic, and essentially that it's just a fascinating topic once you find out that Yahweh is not the only God. Even in the Old Testament you see he's the God of gods and he other gods. He controls the other gods. I mean, people don't listen to that, but if you see like this goddess figure, I think it's very powerful.
Yeah, there's also parallels. There's also parallels between the Asherah and in the story of Amun-Ra. That he also had a wife who I think was Athera. Though there may be a direct relationship there. And the same thing happened. When he had a wife, he was human and just had miraculous abilities. And then they wrote the wife out of the old Theban legends, and once she was gone, then he no longer had any human attributes and simply became the god of air, became air. And so, of course, he became invisible, and you could feel his presence everywhere, and that sort of made him omnipresent, and this is how I think there was a large contribution to Western monotheism came from that.
Oh, yeah, and that is a very important topic, and I think that's a lot of people don't understand where that concept of monotheism actually comes from. I mean, prior to Constantine turning Jesus into the Trinity and doing that whole thing, I mean, it really was this. You had sects that were reviewing Jesus as just an angel of God, not really the Son of God. But yeah, if you go back even further, if you look at how Persia actually inspired the Jews when they were in exile, you start to see where the concept of the devil came from. The Jews didn't have the concept of the devil. Angels and demons, they didn't have that concept. Hell itself, I mean, that concept, certain Jews believed certain ways. It was really diverse, but mainly the consensus, the devil didn't exist, hell didn't exist, and you start to see how Zoroastrianism starts influencing Judaism and giving them these concepts, and eventually that makes it into Christianity and Islam and the Baha'i. But I mean, this concept of just one God that comes from Zoroastrianism as well. Ahura Mazda, he creates his own devil, his own adversary, Angru Manu. You start to see how when the Jews were in exile and the Zoroastrians helped them out and rebuilt their temple. Cyrus the Great rebuilt the temple, who was a Zoroastrian. You start to see, oh, okay, now this makes a little bit more sense. This stuff wasn't there. This outside influence came in, gave them these stories, essentially saved them, and now we have these concepts moving forward,
That's one of my favorite references. I think it's from the Hadnak Nasht, from the what is it? The Zarathustra, not the Zend of the Avestas, but not the Zend, where it mentions that the righteous man will ascend to be with Ahura Mazda in the kingdom of justice and truth, and the unrighteous man will descend to the kingdom of the lie, ruled by Ahriman the opposer, which literally translates into Ha-Satan, the Satan. So Angru Manu it's a Zoroastrian deity of a sort, but it is actually the literal Satan that became appropriated by Judaism and Christianity. And the weird thing is, while the Christians won't admit to this, the Jews will, because rabbinic scholars admit that Zoroastrian has influenced the formation of Judaism more than any other inspiration, at least.
Right.
Well, it's hard to deny what's obvious. It's right there for everybody to see. That's what kills me about all of these people. If you want to believe in a loving God, a creator that's sort of just an oblique idea, great. Hard to argue with that. But to deny science, or to deny research, to deny facts that have been shown, I can't get my head around that. That's what was cool about Arthur George's talk, Sean, when we had him on. They have artifacts that show Nebuchadnezzar worshiping Asherah, not just artifacts depicting the gods, but depicting the king worshiping the god. Well, there it is, or the goddess in this example. There it is. It's not even that long ago that we don't have actual artifacts Because really all
Right.
this is, the whole mythicism thing, is it's just social anthropology. We're just talking about how people believed back when. It's really just a branch of anthropology. So to be able to put your hands on solid facts and art, it really turns me on as compared to what I talked about before, where most of these researchers are taking texts and the finer points, there'll always be debate about whether was Paul referring to a different Jesus, or was there's two different Jesuses in the gospel, stuff like that. People are always going to argue about, but the fact that they found tablets, it's like, what are you going to do? It's like the fossil thing, right, Aaron? We have the fossils. We win.
The way that you described religious mythicism as cultural mythology, I think is perfect, spot on description, and that's exactly the way I look at it. And I don't have this vested interest in where I have to defend a mythology. I mean, I got into a debate on some chintzy little television show out of Georgia with some minister from Liberty University, right? And he's of course going to defend the young Earth creationism model no matter what. And so I asked him, can snakes talk? And he said, well, if you believe that there's a God who can do anything he wants, then you believe that you believe in miracles, then you believe there's a possibility that a snake can talk. To me, he answered the question, no, snakes cannot talk, but you're going to say they do anyway, because you have to believe this bullshit. You know it's bullshit, but you have to believe in it, because I know that there's a lot of people who sincerely believe. And a great example of that would be that one story that came out about the time that Ken Ham debated Bill Nye, and they asked 22 people in the audience or in the lounge area before they started to write these little questions. 22 questions from creationists to evolutionists. Do you remember, guys? You seen this? No? Okay.
No, I have not.
Okay, well, it's hilariously funny that the 22 questions that creationists ask evolutionists, and you see these people, they write something out on magic marker, and there's just a picture of somebody holding these things. I can't remember where it was that I saw this, but I remember it was at least 22 questions, and you can find it in a moment if you look it up. The questions are embarrassingly, fantastically stupid. So you know that poor person really believed and is really deceived and is probably pretty damn dumb. But there's a lot of other people out there who know that it's bullshit, who know that they're only pretending. I mean, I've had people admit to me, these may be what the facts are, but I prefer to believe this. Or in the case of one friend of mine who has always described himself as a Christian, he said, look, he finally said, a year or two ago, he said, I'm Christian because I like to believe that, not because I think it's true.
Right. but Aaron, that's it right there. And once the mythicist position or the Abrahamic faiths are put into mythology, Christianity will still be around. They have proven since the beginning that they're able to adapt and adapt and adapt and keep changing their dogma to fit the culture. The society is what changes religion. I mean, if you look at the Catholic religion, they didn't accept Mary's ascension into heaven until like in the 1950s. I mean, this, forever, the Mary's ascension was only an assumption, and then in the 1950s, when you have women's rights movement and things like that, all of a sudden the church is like, oh yeah, we recognize that now. I think it's funny when I watch your show. I always think you're talking in purgatory. Because you have the black background. But yeah, that's another thing where it's like, purgatory was there, and now it's not there anymore. So, I mean, these religions are so good at adapting and changing their message. And even if Jesus is proven not to exist, Christianity will still be around.
Yeah, and when you mention the Catholics, I have to look at the way they conduct themselves. It seems to me like this T-shirt that I saw once upon a time that said, I must hurry up and catch up with them, for I am their leader. That's exactly the way Catholicism works. And you're right, it's social pressure, right? I mean, you have when you have a pope who goes to Africa, who goes to AIDS-ravaged Africa and tells them that condoms will actually make the situation worse.
Yeah.
Then you have him being reined in and suggestions are made about, hey, you know what, this other guy, Francis, he might just be able to. You look tired. Go.
That's
We're
right.
going to put you in a secured location, because if you try to get out of the secured location, you'll be arrested for crimes against humanity. So you're going to stay here in a secured position, and we're going to promote this other guy. And then the other guy comes up and says, yes, even atheists can come into heaven. And again, like, oh, no. Our infallible leader has misspoken.
Right. Right. Well, I think one of the funniest examples, too, is Islam. If you look at Islam, we're starting to see this now. You know, obviously there's an issue with women in Islam and the oppression of women in Islam, and that's, you know, in the Islamic countries and things like that. Not necessarily here so much, but some of the propaganda that we're starting to see is Islam is so friendly to women because it's the only text that has an entire book dedicated to Mary. So we're starting to see that. I mean, this is like, again, adapting with the times, trying to change their message to fit what people accept. But it's funny, and if you look in Islam, in the Quran, that Mary's the only woman that is mentioned. So, you know, they forget to put that part in the sales pitch.
Well, she may technically be the only woman. She's not the only girl, is she?
Right. Right. Yes. Exactly. Because you have Aisha. Right. Again, problems there. You know, so I mean, they're just going to change the message. And you know, if you talk to a liberal Muslim, they will, you know, the story with Aisha, they completely change it. They have a different way of explaining what the whole thing was, or it's different back then, or you know, it's like slavery in the Bible. Well, that's not real slavery. This is a different form of slavery back then. It's like, what does that mean? Like, it's slavery. You're owning another person. It's not right, you know.
Yeah, I've heard lots of excuses made about the whole slavery thing. The one gets me is when they try to make the excuses on Aisha, because they're not talking about a different time or a different kind of culture, because they're still marrying 8-year-olds now.
Right.
So where's the justification for that?
Right. Exactly right. You know, and again, it takes the society and the culture to kind of change that. And you know, in the U.S., I think it's getting better. In Milwaukee, it seems to be getting better. You know, obviously there's still problems in the U.S., but yeah, that's just kind of, you know, what we're trying to do. And as Rob said, he wants to be an activist. We want to make that change. We want to promote actual change.
Well, as we've got only a couple of minutes left in the show tonight, and I would like you to promote whatever it is that you can promote to make that change.
Awesome.
Well, first and foremost, we want to talk about the conference. We're really excited to have Killer Priest. I can't express it any stronger. He is a huge star and a huge personality for us to be bringing in for his first ever religious lecture. He's kind of looking at a career change, and he wants to do this full time. So we're really excited about that, and we're hoping he's going to bring out a big turnout. Also, Mandisa Thomas.
I don't know if he wants to make a career change.
Well, I think he's kind of alluded to the fact that he doesn't want this to be a one-time thing. He wants to kind of get out there and be on the lecture circuit. He's really interested in it. You can party.
There are very few entertainers that come out for something like this. I mean, there's a few that I'd like to see do it. And you're talking about a good example. You're talking about somebody that's coming from a hip-hop culture that's going to be promoting secularism. That's outstanding.
Yeah, it's really, really huge, and Mandisa Thomas as well. It's a 1-2 punch for Milwaukee, which is a city with a large African American population, and of course there's a bit of a paradox there, because they are the liberal voters, they are the Democratic voters, but they're still incredibly attached to religion as a society and a culture. So for them to start having actual leaders, and Mandisa Thomas has been on CNN and CBS Sunday morning, all of a sudden has launched herself into the stratosphere of black atheist leaders, and it's good for all of us. We all need strong black atheist leaders, so we're really excited about that 1-2 punch at the top, as well as a really heavy dose of outstanding mythicism as always, with David Fitzgerald and local Arthur George here from Lake Forest, Illinois.
Well, outstanding. When is this conference going to be?
It's on the 27th of September, and it's at the Milwaukee Riverfront Hotel.
And The pre-party's on the 26th, so you can come and have some drinks and get to talk to these people, and it's going to be great. And the other thing, real quick before we run out of time, we are starting a new video series which is going to lead into the Right Guys. Don't quote me on that title, but we're working with Joseph Kyle Richards, a local Milwaukee filmmaker, and our first video series is called Holy Shit. I think you saw it, Arn, with the top 10 commandments in the Bible. We're working on different ideas for that, so we're really excited about that as well.
Yeah, it looks like it's going to be on Atheism TV too. I know you're involved with AA.
Yep, absolutely. All right, gentlemen, is there a link that people can look at to get tickets or further information?
Mythicismilwaukee.com.
Excellent. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close it down. I want to thank you, everybody. Good night.
Thanks, Aaron.